there is a danger in it, an inherent danger. When we think about, you know, politicians calling another people, you know, animals, animals. What is this? This is an attempt to dehumanize the other. And you dehumanize him because you want to take advantage of him. It was done in South Africa. And in Rwanda, in the period 1993 to 1994, the media were describing the Tutsis as cockroaches. That was setting the ground for the genocide that eventually happened in 1994. People were being described as cockroaches. So here we have in Gaza and the West Bank, Palestinians are being described as human animals. And the consequence of that discourse, you see, that rhetoric, is the massacres that we see today. You know, every 10 minutes, a child is killed in Gaza. And it's because of that rhetoric that we hear from officials, which is endorsed, by the way, by Westerners. They say Israel has a right to self-defense. See, Uh, so we are in effect watching a slow genocide unfold before us because of the racism, the inherent racism. You see, in the discourse and in the practice of the settler colonials in Palestine. We in the Caribbean must send a message. We must send a message that says to the world that we may be far away geographically, but we understand and we see and we are watching, and we will render every support and demonstration of solidarity to the Palestinian people. Kofi Annan, in his last speech before the General Assembly in 2006 in September, he said, many of us would like to think the Palestinian issue is a local, regional one. He said, but there is no other conflict that has an impact on people across the world, that resonates with people across the world, that can motivate, you see, and stir people across the world as this one in Palestine. This was Kofi Annan's last message before he stepped down as Secretary General. And this is why today we are seeing people in Manila, in Jakarta, in Kuala Lumpur, in Islamabad, and in the Caribbean responding, you see, and showing the indignation and outrage with what is happening. So, how are we going to address this? I think we are seeing a shift. What happens after October the 7th is going to be defining in the sense that we're going to see a new world order. No, people in the global south are no longer prepared to be dominated, you know, by one power in the global north. There is a shift. You see, they've made mistakes in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and they thought that Palestine would be off the agenda. This is, you know, the whole question about normalization in the Middle East between Bahrain and UAE, and so, the whole objective of this was to take Palestine off the agenda and to make the people of the Middle East believe that Iran is the problem. But uh, inadvertently, what they have done, they've brought Palestine back at the top of the international agenda. You see, this is where we are today. Uh, 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 we in the Caribbean have had 300 years of European racism, 300. And so we are in a position, a very good position, to empathize with the Palestinian people who it's more than 100 years now. Just 2 days ago, on November the 2nd, uh, 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 that was the date when the Balfour Declaration was issued. 106 years, you see. And if a people could resist for 106 years in the way that they have been doing, you see, until today, surely they deserve our support and all our solidarity that we can muster. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Brother Dawood. Dr. Dawood, I would just like to let the persons who are viewing and are participating to know that if they have any questions, they can post it via Facebook, and we would put it up on the screen and address it. So don't be afraid. You can have the opportunity to interact. Just post your questions on Facebook and they will be responded to. At this time, I would like to ask our dear sister, Ambassador Linda Sobe, to address us, to share with us. She is on the ground, despite the fact that she is not physically in occupied Palestine. But on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, she is there, receiving reports, lending her support, and of course, conveying to the people of Palestine the support and the fraternity by the peoples of the world to them. Ambassador Linda, you have the floor.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for inviting me. Peace upon you all. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for bringing this issue one more time. Thank you for all the support and the kind word and the just word that are presented toward our just cause. As Dr. Abdullah have mentioned, this is started when the declaration built forth. It did not start on October 7th. And there is, since 1948, 75 years of oppression, displacement, of genocide, of over 7 million refugees. Oh, let me correct. Now we have 1.6 displaced, so let's add them, and we do not want them to be refugees. That is why we urge, and we know our sister nations and our neighbors, they will not accept for our people to be displaced or to be relocated in Al Sinai or be redistributed to countries, because that means the end of the Palestinian struggle, the end of the Palestinian defending our land, because that will mean another 1.6, if not 2 millions to be displaced and refugees all over the world. We, the Palestinians, are defending ourselves. We are, and we have the right to self-determination. My brothers and my sisters, and to all our Caribbean fellows that are listening, joining us, or will see this webinar. Just yesterday, and I'm not gonna even go back to October 7th, 3 hospitals been bombed. 3 hospitals more, other than the Baptist hospital that we all recall and know, all the fatalities, all the assassination, and all the wounded. Over 1,300 assassinated, and over 3,000 injured. And someone came and corrected the other day and said, when in Jabalia refugee camp, when the first report said 400 and we said 700 and 900, said, no, it's not correct. It's 400. And I just looked and said, so 400 lives is okay. 700 might matter, but 400 to lose their life is okay for the international community. There's a saying that says, I was eaten the same day that the white bull was left alone. So if it's Palestine today, it's other countries and countries coming along. Because if Israel, as it is above the law and with immunity, and the whole international community, and I don't want to see whole because this is unjust to our supporters and the countries and the governments that support Palestine, are watching and with double standard. As my brother said, some are heroes and some are terrorists. We are under occupation. We have the right to defend ourselves until we are a full, free, and sovereign state. When all the jails in the occupation side are cleaned and wiped out and being turned to schools. There is over 10,000 right now, because my brothers, in the past few weeks, thousands in the West Bank have been arrested. In Jerusalem, it's not just Gaza. Gaza is a wound in the palm of Palestine. Gaza is Palestine. The children of Gaza is the children of Palestine. The martyrs and assassinated in the West Bank is Palestine. The martyrs and assassinated and detained in Jerusalem are Palestinians. Our capital is Jerusalem, East Palestine. To all of those who think that it started on October 7th, our leadership and our President Mahmoud Abbas have been warning the international community of all what's happening, of all what's coming, of that we, the Palestinian, cannot take any more oppression, that so much blood, so much land confiscation. Someone comes from New York City or from any other European city, and just one of us, the Palestinian, comes back and find them living in their home, and that needs to be acceptable. We need to not to say anything, because they say they were promised that it's their land. Can we go and say we have a promise, or it's our promised land, to go and abuse other nations' sovereignty, other nation land, kill their children? No, not our moral, not our religion. And when I say religion, Palestine is a melting pot. Palestine, there's 3 religions. We do not have any issue with Jews or Christians, because there's Christians, Jews, and Muslims in Palestine. The first prosecuted Palestinian was Jesus Christ, because he's a Palestinian. And he was born in Nazareth and in Bethlehem, which is a Palestinian city. And he is buried in Jerusalem, again, a Palestinian city. Let me talk about 9,750 martyrs assassinated, burned, crushed, just in the past 3 weeks in Gaza and in West Bank. Let me talk about the 23,500 injured in Gaza, and let me talk about the 2,200 injured in West Bank. 140 also assassinated martyrs in West Bank. Let me speak about the schools, hospitals, churches. Isn't that a war crime? Let me talk about Al-Nasser Hospital, the only children's hospital in Gaza that was bombed today, or the 3 hospitals that was bombed yesterday. Or let me talk about the pool of ambulances full of wounded toddlers, infants, and mothers that were bombed and targeted this morning. Or let me talk about Al-Fakhuri School in Jabalia Camp. And Jabalia Camp, as the rest of Gaza Strip, as the rest of Palestine, is being bombed over and over and over. The world felt that 15 tons of explosive on Hiroshima was horrific. But guess what? On Palestine, on Gaza, so far 25,000 tons of explosives. 3,900 infants and toddlers then been assassinated in this war. They're more than all the toddlers and children assassinated in all the conflicts worldwide since 2019. Are we becoming numbers? I thank God for the social media and for the communication and for the internet, that now the world and all our brothers and supporters are seeing what's happening, what they could not see, what happened in 1948 or 67 or 73 or 82 and on and on and on until probably one day before October 7. We cannot say the attack on Israel. We, in our religion, in our culture, we do not, as the rest of the whole world is and should be, we do not support the shed of blood. We do not support targeting civilians. But with that said, what have Israel been doing for the past 75 years? What have they been doing to our homes? What have they been doing to our worship places, to our churches, to our mosques, to our schools, to our mothers, to our brothers? There isn't a home that's exempt either from a martyr, from a prisoner, or from demolish, or from some sort of torture. I want to go back and say that one of the first martyrs in 1936, even prior to the occupation, was my uncle Khalid Ali, who was one of the first martyrs in 1936 from the town, a little town next to Ramallah called Deir Dibwan. Or let me speak about my brothers, or let me speak about my family. And when I say my family, all Palestine is my family. All Palestine are my brothers and sisters and grandchildren. Is this okay, the double standard? Kill them, they're animals, get rid of them, target the infants even in their mother's womb, get rid of them so they do not grow to defend their country, or target the mothers and kill them so they cannot bring any more freedom fighters to this world. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the 2,200 missing under the rubble and probably thousands more between yesterday and the day before, that they're not accounted in the so-called numbers of martyrs? When President Mahmoud Abbas said, protect us, the international community took it as a joke. When our leadership said, we need protection, no one listened. And Israel went on and on and on, having a bloody 2023, a bloody 2022, and go back all the way to 1948, when they gathered all the women and children of Kufr Qasim and put them in a school and killed them, assassinated them in front of their husbands and brothers and fathers, and then took the men of that little village and went around with them saying, if you don't want your women and your children to be killed in front of you, leave now. Those are the same warnings that have been thrown from airplanes and by tanks on civilians in West Bank and in Gaza, asking everyone to leave or they'll see what will happen to them. Any country that think that what Israel is doing is a just case can go ahead and take the Israelis from our land. We want to live a state by state and have peace, but we need a partner for peace. Do you think we're going to have a partner for peace after all this killing? Are they willing? Are they willing? to speak up. I'm not going to say speak up because you are all speaking up. You are showing us the love and solidarity and the prayers, because we do need prayers at this moment. Do you
Thank
know
you.
how many Palestinians overseas don't know where are their loved ones? Haven't heard from their loved ones? Do you know how many child they don't even know their names because they can't speak and the whole family is wiped out? Do you know how many their loved ones are under the rubbles or been buried collectively? Because the smell of death is all over Palestine, all over Gaza. I am sorry to say, wake up, humanity. Thank you.
Extremely saddening, angered, of course, to say the least. There is a question on Facebook, but I would hold the question and I would ask our third presenter, Brother Kwesi Abdullah. In the meantime, I'll say what the question is. It says, in what ways can Caribbean governments exert diplomatic pressure on Israel to promote justice for Palestinians, similar to the successful strategies used against apartheid in South Africa? So that's a question that is posed on Facebook. We will address it in soon, but I would now like to ask our third presenter, Brother Kwesi Atiba, to make his presentation. Brother Kwesi. You're
I
muted,
begin in
Brother
the name of.
Kwesi, for some. Yes.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon everybody who listen. And good evening, good afternoon. I begin in the name of Allah, the Lord of the worlds and the Lord of the people. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, the beneficent, the merciful, Master of the day of judgment. You alone we worship, you alone we ask for help. Guide us in the straight path, not the path of those on whom you have bestowed your anger or those who go astray. The response, well, let me just say hello to everybody. Our brother Dawood, our sister Linda Sobe, and to our chairman, Brother Siddiqui. The response of the state of Israel to the attack by the Palestinian resistance group Hamas has been brutal, but not unexpected. The reaction is a classic case of violence towards a people who reject colonial oppression and choose to act in their own struggle for freedom. There are those who wish to promote that this conflict is one of Hamas militants or Hamas terrorists promoting their brand of venom against innocent Israeli citizens, when this is a result of resistance against white supremacist European lust for land. I want to state that again, white supremacist European lust for land. One of the themes of the occupation of Palestine was, and Brother Dawood mentioned it, a land without people for a people without land. That was one of their chants. But Palestine was never without people. So the inhabitants had to be effectively removed. And this is what was done by the Israeli terrorists in the establishment of their state. We know about Deir Yassin, etc., etc. The Palestinians had to be driven out. The governments of Europe and the United States of America are comfortable with the actions of Israel. because what is being done to the people of Palestine is similar to what was done in the past by many of those Western nations. Christopher Columbus and those after him sailed out of European ports seeking new lands. And the Pope came up with an edict called the Doctrine of Discovery, which gave their countrymen the right to seize any land which was uninhabited or was peopled by non Christians. These lands were known as terra nullius, a land with no recognized authority. And there are many names that we remember, those of us who had to do the European history in school: Hernando Cortez, Ponce de Leon, etc., etc., etc. When Columbus landed in Hispaniola in 1492, the native population was over 1 million. And as the Spanish settlers occupied the island, the population declined so rapidly that by 1514, the number of indigenous persons was about 32,000 people. They were slaughtered, they were enslaved, they died by diseases brought by the Europeans, and that was a rapid drop in their population. The descendants of the so-called pilgrims who landed in America in the 17th century established a form of settler colonialism and promoted a level of violence against the indigenous population, seized their land while trying to exterminate them. Again, those who resisted were termed savages and renegades, and we can remember the names Geronimo, Sitting Bull, Chief Joseph, etc., etc. From the 1776 Declaration of Independence of the then British colony, 13 states formed the United States of America in rebellion against the British monarch. And part of the document states, and I quote, "He," meaning the king, "has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions." Some of these same words we are hearing today for people who are defending their property. Today, these indigenous people are on reservations, and there were boarding schools set up to de-Indianize the Indian. After the 1884 Berlin Conference, where the continent of Africa was carved up by the European governments, several colonies were set up by Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium, Italy, and others. The indigenous people of these colonies were enslaved, severely oppressed, and years later, in their attempts to retake their lands when they claimed independence and they wanted the right to govern themselves, they were mercilessly massacred. In Kenya, the Mau Mau uprising confronted the settlers in a quest to organize their own selves. The British and international view was that Mau Mau was a savage, violent, and depraved tribal cult, an expression of unrestrained emotion rather than reason. Mau Mau was a perverted tribalism that sought to take the Kikuyu people back to the bad old days before British rule. The official British painted Mau Mau as an irrational force of evil, dominated by bestial impulses and influenced by world communism. The British is reported to have detained the total of the Mau Mau of the Kikuyu tribe, 1.5 million persons, and executed hundreds of thousands of Kenyans. King Charles III just visited, where he claimed that he regretted the atrocities, but he did not apologize. The British set up its colonies in Australia and New Zealand, displacing the so-called Aborigines and Maoris by usurping their lands on the basis of terra nullius, white supremacist European lust for land. France grabbed many lands in North and West Africa, and fought the indigenous people very savagely when there were attempts to remove the tyranny of European domination. In Algeria, the slaughter of the people was commonplace. White supremacist European lust for land. The Dutch boy established themselves in southern Africa, and it took many years to remove them from power. Their system of apartheid controlled the society for years with support from Europe, the United States of America, and others who referred to the African resistance groups as terrorists. Mandela was a terrorist, and all the other supporters of the UNC and all these other struggling groups were considered as terrorists. In fact, one British prime minister used to say, "Hang Mandela." The Belgians and Germans also participated in the white supremacist oppression of the people in Africa and were very violent against those who were trying to free themselves from the grips of the colonial authorities. It is estimated that from 1880 to 1920, 10 million Congolese were killed by the forces of King Leopold of Belgium. In South America, there was similar behavior from the Spanish and Portuguese conquerors, who until today have lauded themselves as superior over the original owners of the land. This is the condition that the world has faced for the last 500 years. And there are those who think that this is the norm, or that is the normal, natural arrangement for human affairs. To quote Winston Churchill, former British Prime Minister who was a Zionist sympathizer, he said, "I do not admit that the dog in the manger has the final right to the manger, though he may have laid there for a very long time. I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to those people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, or at any rate, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. I do not admit it. I do not think that the Red Indians had any right to say, the American continent belongs to us, and we are not going to have any of these European settlers coming in here. They had not the right, nor had they the power. Now, that is arrogance. But if we recognize, Winston Churchill has been lauded by people in Europe and in America. And if we move forward to 1948, when the Zionist movement was given a free hand by the British, who had control of Palestine after World War I, guilt over the treatment of Jews by nations in Europe during the early part of the 20th century, which included an attempt to exterminate them by poison gas and concentration camps during World War II, encouraged the establishment of a homeland for Jews in Palestine. But this was promoted by the Zionist movement, most of whom were atheists. They weren't Jews, they were atheists. So while many people might be thinking that there is this struggle between Jews and Muslims, in fact, the promotion of the Zionist movement were actually atheists. And while the population of Palestine at the time was majority Arab, the British allowed Jews from Eastern Europe to migrate into the area and change the demographics. The intention of the powers that took on that responsibility to develop the situation proposed the formation of two states, one Jewish, called Israel, and the other Palestine. This solution never took effect, and the controlling elements in Israel proceeded to expel the Palestinian population from the lands that they had occupied for centuries. In wars fought during 1948, 1967, 1973, the state of Israel conquered more land from the Palestinians and rejected calls from the United Nations to give the land back to its owners, land that they had seized in their violence. Now we have occupied West Bank, occupied Golan Heights, occupied East Jerusalem, all of which the state of Israel has allowed and encouraged its citizens to build settlements. White supremacist European lust for land. Since the 8th of October, the world has seen massacres to the people of Gaza. To date, over 9,000 people have been killed, and there is a call by Israel for Gazans to leave the north and head south, a call which Hamas has told the people to resist. I was asked by a lady in discussion, why is Hamas telling the people to remain in the north? My answer was, if they leave, Israel will take their land just like they did before. White supremacist European lust for land. And when Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, made his analysis yesterday, he did not mention this lust for land. And I suppose he does not relate to the context because he does not come from a history that faced the ravages of settler colonialism. Israel is the surrogate of the European American expression in Western Asia. And this lust for land seems to be foremost in the people. This must be resisted. Settler colonialism must be stopped. If it is not stopped in Palestine, then where will it be stopped? And no person, especially Caribbean people, who understand settler colonialism can support the state of Israel as is. Our history is one of settler colonialism, the whole Caribbean. And we have faced some of that oppression until the early 1960s. It is a white supremacist lust for land. And we need to get that clear. This is not a battle between Muslim and Jew. It is a European lust for land which we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Kwesi. Thank you, Brother Kwesi. Um, very touching presentations. There are two resolutions which I have asked to be posted. But before we get to those resolutions, there is one question that was posted on Facebook. It says, in what ways can Caribbean governments exert diplomatic pressure on Israel to promote justice for Palestinians, similar to the successful strategies used against apartheid in South Africa? I would ask the presenters if they want to make a comment on it to go ahead, but to try and be brief because already we're close to 1 hour and we only have about 30 or so minutes to finish the session. So we ask you to be very brief in your contributions. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, Ambassador.
Um, I first want to thank the Caribbean states for all their unwavering support. And one of the ways to continue to support is to continue the vote in favor of a sovereign state of Palestine. And for those countries in the Caribbean that do not recognize Palestine yet, to follow suit of the rest of their sister nations and most of the world and recognize the Palestinian state. Few days last Friday, all the Caribbean unanimously voted in favor of Palestine and in favor of the human rights and a ceasefire. And I urge the countries that don't recognize us to please go ahead and recognize. And for the people of the Caribbean, to please continue to raise your voice, to please continue and boycott the products that help the occupation to slaughter, kill, and buy more weapons and more explosives to dump on Palestine, and to not be and to be very aware of whom are these companies. In South Africa, one of the most effective ways and beginning was also the boycott, and we all know what did that to the apartheid. My fellow Caribbeans, we are currently the last apartheid in this century, the last apartheid in the world. We are under siege, under occupation. Gaza is an open air prison, and no water, no electricity, no food, no health, no medication, and no energy. Isn't that a collective open air prison that they are looking to get over with all the Palestinians in Gaza? So please talk to your children, to your grandchildren, to your neighbors. Let them participate in the boycott. Let them participate in spreading the word. Give lectures. I am willing to come and speak in public. Thanks to the internet right now, we can all be like, right now I'm sure there is participant on the webinar from all over the Caribbean and other parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Brother, Dr. Dawood, Brother Kwesi, any response?
Well, I want to continue in the same trend of thought because I think something very important was said. The reference was made to apartheid, and it's something that we in the Caribbean can identify with. Uh, but I say to you a short story that happened recently in Brazil. I was there a few months ago, and I mentioned the issue of apartheid, and an Afro-Brazilian said to me, "No, you cannot compare, apartheid in South Africa with Palestine." And I had to say to him, "Look, yani, apartheid is not confined to any geographic location or any historic period. It's a system of oppression, of, of segregation that promotes the supremacy of one group over another. And beyond that, when Reverend Tutu went to Palestine, Reverend Desmond Tutu went to Palestine, he said he was shocked by what we saw in Palestine. It was worse than what we encountered in South Africa. This is Desmond Tutu speaking. He was the conscience of the anti-apartheid movement. And he bears testimony that what is happening in Palestine was worse than what they saw in South Africa. Huh? Now, the thing is, how it started, the boycott came out of the United Nations in the early 1960s, when the General Assembly adopted a resolution that this system was abhorrent, you see, and South Africa, until it changed its ways, until it dismantled that system, it will not be entertained, accommodated in the UN. This has to be done once more. We want our countries in the Caribbean to lobby and work within the General Assembly for such a resolution that will declare what is happening in Palestine apartheid. Many scholars, many human rights organizations have attested to this. So there's no doubt. And the point about apartheid is that it is a crime against humanity. There is a convention, the 1976 Convention Against Apartheid. And the crime of apartheid is also in the statutes of the Rome Treaty, which sets up the International Court of Justice. So apartheid is not confined to a bygone era. You see, the jurists know that it can be repeated. And here we see in it developing in Palestine. So our governments in the Caribbean must look back in their history, their predecessors who championed that cause in the 1960s and got the UN to boycott South Africa, as well as the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth supported it. All our English speaking islands in the Caribbean that are members of the Commonwealth, this is the way we have to go. You see, that this crime is not a crime against the Palestinians, it's a crime against humanity. That's what the law says.
Thank you. Thank
Assalamu
you. Well
alaikum.
said.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. We have to recognize that the Caribbean is made up of a number of small states, and many of the leaders may be afraid to speak openly about the present situation, regardless of what is in their hearts. And we as people in the Caribbean have to help them to, as somebody said in one of our meetings, stiffen their spines, because a wrong is a wrong. Injustice is injustice. And it doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are, you can speak out against an injustice. And that is what we have to encourage our leaders to do. And yes, the boycott is something that we can do. We can look around in our own environment and see what are the things that come from Israel that we can cut off and do that as people. But as I say, more than anything, we have to show our Caribbean leaders that we support them when they speak up for right, because they voted for the ceasefire in the United Nations General Assembly, and we should really, help them to stand up for what is right, because we know very well those people who are against them, against us, those European, those people from the United States of America, of Canada, we know the positions that they will take, and they will deal with the question of sanctions for speaking out and those kinds of things. So we know that we have to help our leaders to stand up. Thank
You. Thank you. There is some posts. I don't know if everyone can see the post, but I was looking at something on posts on Facebook here, and it is the question of a resolution, and I would read. It says, "We declare that the state of Israel does not share the common values and principles enshrined in Caribbean constitutions. It does not believe in the equality of all men and women, and that there is no inherent superiority of the white man over the black man, or of Muslim over the Christian, or Hindu or atheist, which beliefs Caribbean people regard as inalienable. The state of Israel operates on the premise that it is chosen and that Arabs and non-Arabs are inferior beings. Like Nelson Mandela, we believe that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. And like Malcolm X, we believe that the Palestinian struggle is not just a cry for justice. It is a blistering battle for the most fundamental human rights that every living soul on this planet should inherit by birthright." This is a post which I would like us to think about and to adopt as part of a resolution coming out of this webinar. Any comments from the panelists? Tracy or Mr. Dawood, you wanted to speak on it?
Well, I think it is pertinent. I think the wording is quite balanced. but it addresses the issue it, that something has to be done from our region, and I think that it should be adopted by the relevant organizations and people across the region. Um, I want to say also that I think while it is good to address these matters to our governments, we should not by any means uh, um, exclude civil society bodies and organizations from this process. Trade unions are playing a very important role in the anti-apartheid struggle today in Europe and in America, you see, uh, and in parts of South America. So while it is good to get our governments on board, I endorse this fully, and to stiffen their backs, as Brother Kwesi said, let us also reach out to civil society bodies and institutions and organizations, particularly trade unions, people in the ports, those who offload ships. Let's reach out to them and explain to them what is at stake here.
Definitely, most definitely. Ambassador?
I just wanted to and comment in one of my dear brothers just mentioned, and when we talked about apartheid, and I wanted to talk also about segregation. First of all, I believe the text, and it's a great wording. Hopefully, um, our Caribbean sister nations can adapt and work on it, since we, as an ambassador, I rather not to comment on it because I am an ambassador. We do not interfere in sovereign states' decision as the occupation do with other states, and therefore we know that our sister nations, the Caribbean states, as we are a member, an observer member in the Caribbean State Organization, we ask them to do as they usually do, what's right, and support, and for the people of the Caribbean to support the decisions and the courageous stand that the leader and the government of the Caribbeans are taking on this war. But I want to talk one moment on a segregation and say, since I said it's an open air prison, do you know that there is apartheid roads where only Israelis can ride in these roads in 2023? Do you know that there is apartheid schools? And do you know that there is apartheid cards? If any of the buses passes by, and even if it's an old citizen lady or a child or anyone holds out their ID, ours is green and theirs is blue, and the same minute you wave it out to the bus driver because you need to take it out, you're left out. On the checkpoints on the roads, if you have a yellow car plate, you can pass. If we, the Palestinian, have the blue plate, we cannot pass. And this is just a tiny example of segregation. So it's what's just left. It's for us to hold an ID also showing on our arms that we are Palestinian and that we need to be oppressed in our own country, in our own land. Gives the right to anyone coming from any other place in the world to come and take over our home, our land, uproot our olive trees, uproot our children, kill them, assassinate them. And the ones they did not assassinate with bombs, with 25 tons of explosive, they're assassinating them, leaving them without electricity, without food, without medication, without any energy, without any way of living. Thank you.
Brother Kwesi?
Well,
Any comments?
clearly we have to, recognize that that measure of oppression, as I say, it's a white supremacists grab for land and they will do whatever they think they need to do to get other people out of the space. And that has to be resisted. It has to be resisted by word. Hopefully, some people will resist by deed. We are not in a position to physically do much, but we can do, as they say, the boycotting. We can use our tongues. We can, get our people up to understand what the fundamental issues are. It is not a religious battle, and we have to keep that clear in the minds of our people. We're not about that. And those who we interface with, those who we share time with, who do not understand, we should try to make them understand what the issues are. Because one of the things we have to pay attention to is who has the mic. And the Israeli narrative, the European narrative, has stood there for a long, long while. And we have to blow that narrative to bits. We have to establish what the Palestinian narrative really is and keep that foremost for people to understand. Thank you.
There is a post of a resolution by the Barbados-based NGO Caribbean Against Apartheid in Palestine, which has been tabled, calling for the Secretary General of CARICOM to formally request Caribbean governments to end diplomatic relations with Israel. I know Ambassador says because of your diplomatic status, there are certain things you are unable to comment on, but that does not mean that other persons cannot comment on it.
Absolutely.
One of the things
Absolutely.
someone also raised was something that we seem not to take into consideration, in my opinion. We have been experiencing record temperatures in the Caribbean, heat waves. And the person asked me, all of this bombing that is taking place, all of this energy that is released into the atmosphere, whether it is in Palestine or Ukraine or wherever, does this have any effect on global warming? Is it just the cars that we are talking about when we talk about global warming? Or those who say they don't want to get involved for whatever reason, are you not involved because you say nothing about this energy that is released by this unwarranted wars that are taking place? And are you not affected? So it is something that, in my opinion, everyone, irrespective of where you live or how you feel about the issue, you have to take a stand. And I would invite comments from the floor. Thank you.
If I may, Siddiq, while we wait for comments from
Yes.
the floor, I just wanted to mention
No,
what is
actually,
happening.
we are unable to receive a voice comment from the floor, but we can receive written comments from them and we can respond. So go ahead, Dr. Dawood.
No, I said I wanted to look at the responses that we saw from South Africa, South America in the last 10, 15 years. If you remember, Yani, the late President Chavez in Venezuela, he cut diplomatic ties immediately after the 2012 onslaught. And today we've seen a similar trend and resolve on the part of governments like Colombia, Bolivia, and Chile, recalling the ambassadors downscaling their diplomatic relations with Israel. It can be done. It doesn't matter how poor we are in the Caribbean. We need to have muster the political will, and join forces with fellow neighboring countries, as I said, like Venezuela and Bolivia. The Bolivians and indigenous people like us in the Caribbean, their experience is similar to ours. You see, where the majority of the population of Bolivia are indigenous people, you see, and they can empathize with what is happening in Palestine very easily. This is an opportunity to forge, a solidarity alliance between our governments in the Caribbean and those in South America, and in that way, it will not, it will strengthen us rather than leave us sort of isolated on a limb by ourselves in the Caribbean. We have countries in the region in South America who are willing to take similar steps.
Definitely. Kwesi?
Well, it's not much to comment more on because that is where we must go. The region is, the southern region especially has had it with respect to settler colonialism. We all know about it, and we have to keep that in front. Some people may have forgotten it. Some of our people may have forgotten what our forefathers went through, and they have become kind of comfortable. But when we see what is happening in Palestine, it harks us back to a certain time in the Caribbean where people couldn't do certain things. People like Butler and etc., who couldn't make certain kind of move because of the British. And we have to pay attention to those things, not forget our own history, and live out what we have learned from those who went before us. So I agree with that. We should seek support from all the NGOs, CBOs in our region, and try to get them going forward, on this issue. I mean, specifically before we end, I would really like to thank the brothers who and sisters who work to get this webinar together, because that is very important. From there, we can build something and seek the support of other people rather than individually going and put your hand up.
Yeah, one of the things that crosses my mind is how, or the necessity rather, to have young people. And when I say young people, persons who are in secondary schools about to leave at that level, persons who are in universities, the young people. In the 70s, when there was an attempt to educate people and to bring people up to date on the atrocities handed out to Black people, there was an attempt to distract people by song, music, play, and dance. There is a attempt today. Everything is party, party, party. We have important issues. And for this struggle, it is not something that, in my opinion, ends tomorrow. It is a prolonged struggle. But for it to be successful, our young people must be on board. Not the gray-haired persons like myself and Kwesi and Dr. Dawood, right? We
Myself.
have to get, no, Ambassador, you're quite young compared to us.
I'm 56. Believe me, I'm a product of the
Absolutely.
occupation.
We absolutely have to have our young people and our young voices. They must not just hear, they must be able to speak out. They must be able to demonstrate that they have the ability to understand and to participate in whatever it takes to stop these injustices, whether it be in Palestine today or wherever it is tomorrow. And I strongly urge that from this webinar, attempts be made to involve more of the younger generation, not only in the understanding of what's happening, but in articulating and encouraging their peers to get involved. It is not just about going to school, getting an education, getting a good job, or whatever. Our very existence is threatened by what is happening in the world today. As I said, the question of global warming, the wars, the dropping of bombs, the testing of nuclear weapons, etc., is having a devastating effect on our lives. And we absolutely have to get our young people involved. We would hopefully, we have about another 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe we can have some closing comments from everyone, and we see how we can move forward from here. We started Kwesi.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon everybody. My broad comments that I started off with is this question of white supremacist European land lust, the lust for land. Because to me, that is a fundamental area that has not been understood and addressed by those people who are looking at the Palestinian question. Because it's broader than the Palestinian question, but the Palestinian question is a subset of it. We have to see that. And we as people have to work to protect ourselves from those things by trying to inform people of where they are, people who may not understand what that is. There are many people who have grown up, and as I said, think it's a natural thing for indigenous people in America to be on reservations. In Trinidad and Tobago, we do not have any great amount of indigenous people again. We have some people who are asking the government for 25 acres of land in Arima. I was in Dominica and I went up to quote unquote what they call Carib Mountain, and I saw how those indigenous people live. And some of those things are just tragic, and there has been no effort to correct some of those issues. So that Palestinian question, that driving people into the desert and that driving people into other Arab countries, it is exactly what was done before. Get rid of them. If you can't get rid of them, subdue them, put them in a corner, and let the European personality take over. De-Indianize the Indian. That is where we want it to be. We have to continually resist that thinking. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah the Lord of the worlds, made all mankind free. We are all the children of Adam, and we have the same share in the birthright of Adam as any other human being on the face of the earth. The Palestinian people have that right. The people in Israel have that right, and they cannot force anybody of what Allah has given to them. Allah has shared, there's a statement that a man said to me, and I'll close with this. He said, Allah made enough for the needy, but he did not make enough for the greedy. So that is what I want to wind up with. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you.
Thank you, Brother Kwesi. Well said. Dr. Dawood, and then we'll ask Ambassador to close.
Well, in my closing remarks, I like to point out something I think is very important for brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, and that is not to confuse uh, anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. In Europe, uh, there's a tendency on the part of the officials to confuse this matter. This project is a colonial project. It was rejected by the Jewish religious establishment in Europe when it started in the late 19th century. They said that it is contrary to the faith. And the only Jewish member of the British cabinet in 1917, when the Balfour Declaration was issued, his name is Edwin Montagu. He said that Zionism is a mischievous political creed. You see, he's Jewish, but he said this about Zionism. So, don't confuse the two. However, there are governments who will, and people and organizations and media establishments who will target you and say that you are anti Semitic if you criticize Zionism. There was a time when Zionism was declared a racist ideology by the United Nations until 1990. It was on the book as a racist ideology akin to apartheid. But only after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the balance of power shifted in favor of the United States, they were able to take it off the books. So Zionism became acceptable. They knew in the heart of hearts that Zionism is a racist ideology. It is just a question of political influence that they have managed to take it off the books and to tell people if you criticize Zionism, you are anti Semitic. This is what is happening in France today. In France today, they're proposing a law to make criticism of Zionism illegal. It will become a crime in France if you. But we are not surprised. It's the same France that make the hijab illegal, and a woman, a schoolgirl, cannot wear the abaya. You see, this is the same France. So in the Caribbean, we must not confuse the two. Let us recognize that what we're dealing with is an anti-colonial struggle, in Palestine, a project that was rejected by the religious establishment. Religious Jews didn't want to have to do anything to do with Zionism. You see, and I hope that we make this distinction between Judaism and Zionism. They're not the same. They're not even two sides of the same coin.
Thank you, Dr. Dawood. Ambassador?
I want to thank you once again for hosting me and for having this webinar. I want to thank you for being the voice of justice and for standing for what's right, for the human rights, for the voice of the oppressed. And when they asked Ben Gurion, what are you going to do with all these Palestinians? He said, the young will forget and the old will die. I'm born in 1967 on the Naksa, on the second occupation, the full occupation of Palestine. I'm going to be 56 years old, and I did not forget. And my kids will not forget, and my grandkids, and so is every Palestinian. And then he said, and the old will die. But he was wrong, because the old, before they passed away, they made sure we understand what's the meaning of holding the key of the homes they left when the catastrophe in 1948. They planted in us that seed of justice, of freedom, of liberty, and of moral, and of knowing that Palestine will be free. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you all. There's a lot more that can be said. But as we know, everyone is pressed for time. There are a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One, that I want to thank, first of all, the persons who were instrumental in putting this webinar together. There were persons from Jamaica, from Trinidad and Tobago, from Guyana, from Barbados, and of course from Grenada. I want to thank you for your efforts and to say that I don't think this is the last of what we are going to do. We have to find ways and means of continuing this. There's a quote I want us to remember as we close off. It says, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil. The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who stand by and do nothing. But by those who stand by and do nothing." Years ago, there was a saying that I learned came from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It says, if you see something that is wrong, the least you can do is feel bad about it in your heart. Then there is a higher level that you can rise to by speaking about it. Today we are speaking about it. And then there's a final thing that you can do, which is the greatest of all, and that is to physically do something about it. Let's rise to physically boycotting, assisting in blocking shipments of Israeli products, identifying products that leave Israel, make its way to us in the Caribbean, refusing to purchase, refusing to engage in whatever way to get these products out, and refusing to purchase them. We have to begin hitting them where it hurts. And if it is that there's complicity with other countries in this respect, then those countries also must be targeted, irrespective of which country it is. I believe if we can do these things, then we would have at least risen to do what we can do in our time to ensure that this apartheid regime in Palestine is dismantled. Once again, I want to thank WPG10 for facilitating this, and for those who helped in organizing the webinar, and for those who participated, because without your participation, it will be useless. So, good evening, have a blessed weekend, and I wouldn't say the struggle continues. I say the struggle intensifies. Not the struggle continues, the struggle intensifies. That's what I want to leave us with this afternoon. Thank you. God bless.